Hey everyone, welcome to another episode of Gent Chat. Joining me today is a very talented shoutcaster who has worked live stages at conventions like E3, Gamescom, and PAX, as well as numerous tournaments for the ESL, all the way from England, ESL Munchables.
Okay. So I'm from a place called Doncaster in England, which most people won't have heard of, but if you know Sean Bean, who plays Ned Stark in Game of Thrones, it's about 20 minutes away from where he's from, so that gives you a vague idea. I've been gaming just like basically everyone else in the gaming industry. I've been playing games my entire life, and I've always been really competitive, but I was never actually that good at video games, so I was trying to find my way to make it into the industry. I obviously wanted to be a pro player, but that was never going to happen, so I decided commentary would probably be a good route instead. So I started just doing commentary in my free time on YouTube and Twitch and things, and then kind of one thing led to another. I did a whole bunch of voluntary stuff for a couple of years, and then eventually managed to persuade people to actually pay me to talk about video games. And now I'm working full-time for ESL. I officially work for the ESL UK office, but I'm currently on a temporary office transfer to ESL North America. America's a nice place. Obviously the weather here is amazing, and everyone's nice and everything. There's just little bits that are different, like some just strange things. Like for example, if you go to get gasoline for your car or petrol, you have to pay before pumping here, whereas in the UK you pump and then you go in and pay. So I spent 20 minutes at a petrol station, what is going on? Why won't the pumps work? I'm so confused. And it doesn't say anywhere you have to go inside and pay first. It says, lift pump and, either way. Lots of little things are different like that. There's quite a few different examples of that, but generally speaking, everything's cool. The job inherently of a shoutcaster, when you're on broadcast specifically, is to kind of bridge the gap between the pro players and the viewers. There's a lot of stuff that even if you're a player, so let's take League of Legends as an example. If you're a silver level player, there's a lot of things that will happen in a pro game that either you don't understand or that you've not even considered, and it's the commentator's job to translate that kind of thing into layman's terms so it's accessible to the audience, so that basically your job in short is to make the game entertaining, and also you have to give value to the broadcast, right? If the broadcast would be better without the commentators, then you're not doing your job. You get me? So your job is to make the broadcast as good as it possibly can be. Myself as a commentator, when I'm doing play-by-play, one of the biggest things I like to bring is I really focus on storyline stuff. So telling the stories of the players or of the teams, where they've come from, what this game means to them, what things within the game mean in context of the larger picture of the game and of the series, and that kind of thing is what I really strive to achieve in a broadcast. But I know there's a lot of casters out there who they'll focus more on the micro stuff in the game. So if you take Crepo, who's done a bunch of casting for League of Legends, his commentary for colour is very specific to game mechanics, whereas you look at a colour caster like Monte Cristo or Deficio, they focus much more on the macro side of things, on that. So it very much depends on different casters, and different people will add value to the broadcast in different ways. It totally depends on the personality. Well, I think you can definitely make a comparison between the two. There are a huge amount of similarities. I think obviously the biggest difference between the two right now is just sheer budget, right? When you compare the LCS's budget to ESPN, Major League Basketball or whatever, it's not even similar numbers, So first of all, eSports is still very much growing in terms of that. In terms of formats and things, eSports is actually quite different to traditional sports in a lot of ways. If you go to a sports event, I went and saw some baseball recently, there is a lot of extra content on the screen, especially in the stadium. There's a lot of extra content on the screens and things in the stadium to keep people entertained and keep people interested, especially when there's downtime during the game, which is something that I feel like esports is still trying to catch up on, but also in esports you have commentators in the stadium, whereas in traditional sports, generally speaking, you don't. So there's a lot of differences that I don't think esports is going to follow exactly in the suit of traditional sports. I think esports is kind of forging its own path and just taking parts from traditional sports that it likes and that works well with video games as opposed to traditional sports. One thing that esports does a lot better than traditional sports is like building player-specific storylines. If you compare like famous players in traditional sports versus famous players in esports, you know a whole lot more about the actual lives of esports players because of the documentaries that come out, the interviews that happen. And like if you watch traditional, I'm not saying this is relevant to all traditional sport interviews, but generally speaking, the interviews are very much about the game and very little about the player. Whereas in esports, it's a lot more about the player and a lot more about building that personality. So I think that's one really good example of very drastic contrast between the two. And in that respect, I honestly think traditional sports could learn from esports. But I also think that traditional sports is very much set in a way that is very comfortable, very repeatable, and clearly works. So it's not like, I don't think they urgently need to copy esports, but definitely I think esports does a better job of bringing forth the player's personality. In some ways, traditional sports is still leaps and bounds ahead of esports in terms of broadcast, but in other ways, esports is very much making its own path, and it's the leader in its own industry because most of the things that we're doing haven't ever been done before. So, this is always a hard question. Like, if I knew the answer to this question, I would have made a game and would very rich right now, you know. It's always difficult to say. One of the biggest thing, in my opinion, is the community itself. Like, if the community doesn't care about PvP or about competitive, the game is not going to become an esport. That's just a fact, like straight up. And I've seen multiple game developers, I'm not going to name any names, that have really tried to push esports with their game, and the community the entire time has been like, I don't care about this. And the developer will pump money into it, but it's just not going anywhere. And like the community, it has to come from the community. Esports as a concept came from the community, and I believe that the community will always be a backbone of it, and it has to be kind of the foundation that you build upon. But I think in terms of like physical things that you can do to try and make your game an esport, first of all, spectator client has to be great. Like, simple as that. You're going to be watching the game if it's an esport. You have to be able to, and it has to be easy to do and like look good. That I feel like that kind of goes without saying, but a lot of games have really terrible spectator clients. Like just making the game accessible to esports is the simplest, easiest way. Like spectator clients, and also like custom game lobbies, being able to actually change things about the game, being able to make custom game lobbies. I feel like that's gone out of fashion. I think like Halo 3 had perfect examples of all of these, and that's why it was one of the games that when esports was starting to build a bit of momentum, that was kind of at the forefront with MLG. And it's because it was so easy to make an esport. It was so easy to run competitive tournaments, and like you could have community tournaments, you could do whatever you wanted in the game, which is, I don't know, I feel like it's gone out of fashion somehow that you're able to customize game modes and things. And I think it's kind of coming back in now. I think developers are starting to realize that. But I mean, if you look at Battlefield 1, for example, the Battlefield 4 community was quite a niche community, but they were passionate. And they were waiting for Battlefield 1 in the hopes that it would revive Battlefield esports. And for like a solid year or something, they couldn't actually make private custom game lobbies. You couldn't, like anyone, it was automatically open so anyone could join, and like you couldn't have passwords on. And like there was a whole bunch of, I didn't play it a huge amount, but I know quite a few players did. There was a huge amount of issues with that, and it's just like, if you can eliminate that kind of like super nitty gritty stuff, you're already leaps and bounds ahead of your competition. If it's visually easy to tell what's happening, a lot of games, like in terms of MOBA, there are a few smaller MOBAs, again, not going to mention any names or anything, that haven't had the same success that when you look at League of Legends. Here's the Storm Dota 2, and like now Vainglorious, like on the rise as well. When you look at some of the smaller MOBAs that never really took off, if you look at like the action, the fights, it's all very confusing. You can't really see what's happening particularly well, and I think that is super important if you want to make, not just for shoutcasting, but like if you want to make a successful esport, it has to be watchable, right? And this is one of the issues that Overwatch had right at the very start of things in the beta, and they improved the spectator mode a lot, and people just understand the game better now, so it's a lot easier to watch. But one of the biggest criticisms of Overwatch is it's just difficult to watch. Like, there's just too much going on, and there's just a lot of stuff that is going to happen off screen no matter what. And so I think that's one of the biggest hurdles Overwatch has had. I think they're kind of getting past that now, and I think once Overwatch League comes out, that will really answer a lot of questions. But definitely just visibility and making your game easy to follow when action is happening is the most important thing. If it's too simple, pro players don't exist, right? There has to be a big enough skill gap for there to be people that are exceptional. Because if the game's too simple, then everyone is exceptional. So there's no call for esports at that point, because it's not really competitive, I guess.